Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Burges Watson. You're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Arabiya News headquarters. These are our top stories. With just a week to go until Election Day, the former President Donald Trump heads to key battleground state of Pennsylvania as Kamala Harris rallies in Washington in what her team is calling the former prosecutor's closing argument. Israel's parliament votes to ban the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency from operating in Israel and the occupied East Jerusalem, alleging its collusion with Hamas. That's raising concerns about the delivery of aid to war-torn Gaza. And Hezbollah names Naim Qassem as the group's new leader, this after the killing of Hassan Nasrallah last month. Hello and welcome. The US Republican presidential candidate, former President Donald Trump, has given a press conference after facing criticism for a litany of comments made by speakers at his rally on Sunday in New York. Comments that were seen by many as being misogynistic and racist. Well, later today, the Democratic nominee, Vice President Kamala Harris, will draw a comparison between her vision and that of her Republican rival when she delivers a speech at the same park near the White House where the former President Trump rallied his supporters just before the attack on the US Capitol on the 6th of January 2021. Our correspondent Kate Fisher filed this report.
In Jose Crespo's barbershop, they're not happy with Donald Trump. At the former president's rally, comedian Tony Hinchcliffe disparaged the island where Jose's family is from.
There's a lot going on. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
Jose says he feels disrespected.
It's called us garbage. Yeah, you go to Puerto Rico, you're gonna see how beautiful everything is. Down to the people, to the mountains, everything's beautiful. The food, the culture. So I really don't understand where this comes from. It just sounds like hate.
The former president has bragged about the size of the crowd, but not apologized for the comments.
We've had the greatest rallies in the history of the world, not just this country. There's never been. I mean, we filled up Madison Square Garden last night. We could have filled it up 10 times. If you looked outside, you saw all the way back to the Hudson River.
Kamala Harris. Campaigning at a semiconductor factory in the swing state of Michigan, Vice President Kamala Harris tried to draw a comparison with her Republican rival.
My opponent spends full time talking about just kind of diminishing who we are as a man. And talking down at people. Talking about, I don't know, we're the garbage can of the world. We're not.
And the vice president is planning to continue to highlight the differences between her and the former president when she addresses thousands of her supporters on the Ellipse. That's the park just south of the White House, where on January the 6th, 2021, Donald Trump mobilized a mob to riot at the US Capitol building. The symbolism helping her to make her closing argument to the American people as one of the closest US presidential races in decades has reached its final week. Kate Fisher, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Well, our chief correspondent, Simon Marks, is standing by for us in DC and joins us now. Simon, good to have you with us. Donald Trump spending today in Pennsylvania. Just tell us how the race is shaping up there.
Well, he's got some work to do in Pennsylvania. There is no question about that, Tom, because Pennsylvania is home to, among others, an estimated 500,000 voters from Puerto Rico. And as you heard in that report from Kate Fisher, there is tremendous anger within the Puerto Rican community about those comments that were made by a comedian, part of the warm-up act for Donald Trump at Madison Square Garden on Sunday. The Trump campaign says that he was not reflecting the former president's view of Puerto Rico, but it was notable earlier today when Donald Trump held a fairly wide-ranging availability for reporters and supporters at Mar-a-Lago down in Florida, that he would only describe Sunday night's event in New York as a place where there was so much love in the room. He didn't do anything in his appearance in Florida this morning to push back and to try and assuage the concerns of not just Puerto Rican voters, but other Hispanic and Latino Americans who support Donald Trump has worked so hard to try and secure, that in fact he genuinely joins the condemnation of what that comedian had to say. Schools in the town of Allentown in Pennsylvania, where former President Trump will be appearing later today, have been closed for the day. The school district says out of an abundance of caution. There are expected to be protests by Puerto Ricans and others close to the site where Donald Trump will be appearing. But he is definitely under pressure to address this issue directly, and it's going to be very interesting to see whether he does that when he's in Pennsylvania later today, to try and take the sting out of it, because in this very closely contested election, in the very closely contested battleground state of Pennsylvania, you know, this has the potential to become an issue that denies him victory, and that would be a massive problem, a massive own goal for his campaign.
OK, so that's the Trump campaign effort today. Let's talk about Kamala Harris. She's going to be rallying in Washington, and they're calling this her closing argument. Just tell us what we can expect from that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because usually in presidential elections, you know, the closing argument comes the night before the election with a massive rally. I think Kamala Harris is trying to get at least 2 bites of the cherry here. She's going to address a crowd estimated to be possibly 40,000 strong. That's the size of the permit that they've been granted by the Washington, D.C. authorities. And she's going to be standing pretty much in exactly the same spot where Donald Trump was standing on January the 6th, 2021. When he said to his supporters, we're going to march up to the Capitol. Of course, he never marched up to the Capitol with them, but we all know what happened when they got to the Capitol and they broke in to the congressional building in that deadly rampage. So what Kamala Harris plans to do is to use that spot as the place to try and convey to people present here in Washington and also to voters all over the country that the country's at a crossroads, that Donald Trump is too dangerous, too extreme, too erratic, and too much of an enemy of democracy to be entrusted once again with the presidency. But she is also expected to focus on her own policy plans for 4 years in the White House. She's been under pressure, even from some supporters who say, don't make this all about the future of democracy. You've got to address the concerns that voters have about the economy, illegal immigration, a whole host of other issues. So I think it's going to be a slightly more wide-ranging speech than we were initially thinking we would hear. But what the campaign is going to do is use these images of her on the ellipse here in Washington, D.C., surrounded by tens of thousands of supporters. They'll use those images in the final, it'll be 6 days, won't it, of the election campaign as they roll out a whole host of fresh advertisements based off the back of this event.
And Simon, lastly, the polls have obviously changed with every day that's passed. The latest Reuters poll that I've seen shows that Harris's lead over Trump nationally has shrunk to just 1 percentage point. I'm just wondering what the pundits are saying about all of this.
Well, you're absolutely right. That poll published by Reuters today, conducted by Ipsos, says that Kamala Harris has a 44% rating nationally to 43% for Donald Trump among registered voters. And the poll is absolutely clear about what is top of mind for voters. 47% of voters favour Donald Trump's approach to the economy, to 37% for Kamala Harris. And that's one of the reasons why I think she's going to have to address that head on when she makes that speech later today. Her campaign chief strategist, Jennifer O'Malley Dillon, has said today to supporters and in television interviews that this election is competitive in every single one of the 7 battleground states. There is not a clear winner in any of those battleground states right now. She's describing it as a margin of error election. And that gives you an indication of the knife edge that, publicly at least, Democrat strategists say they are finding themselves confronting. They will be hoping that Kamala Harris does something in this rally tonight and in the next few days to try and eke out an advantage over Donald Trump. But all the signs are pointing to a very close election result and potentially a very long night on Tuesday of next week into Wednesday morning. No guarantee that by Wednesday morning here we're going to know the outcome of this election.
OK, Simon Marks in Washington, thank you very much indeed for bringing us all the latest. In other world news, Israel's parliament has voted to ban the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency from operating in Israel and occupied East Jerusalem, alleging its collusion with Hamas. Well, the legislation prohibits contact between UNRWA employees and Israeli officials within 3 months, thereby restricting aid operations in Gaza and the West Bank. Well, cooperation with the Israeli military is crucial for UNRWA's aid delivery, as it is the primary UN organisation in the region. Well, the US and the UK have raised serious concerns. The US State Department is urging Israel to reconsider that ban, calling UNRWA irreplaceable for humanitarian aid in Gaza. Well, the UNRWA Commissioner General, Philippe Lazzarini, took to X to express his strong disapproval of the ban. He described the decision by Israel as a form of collective punishment, which he says will deprive over 650,000 girls and boys in Gaza from an education, putting an entire generation of children at risk. Well, the European Union has also condemned Israel's move to ban UNRWA from operating within Israel and East Jerusalem, as William Denslow now reports from Brussels.
The European Union has warned that the law could have far-reaching consequences that would seriously hamper the agency's ability to provide life-saving services to the people of Gaza. The statement shared on social media by the EU's Foreign Affairs Chief Josep Borrell adds that the legislation stands in stark contrast to international law and the fundamental principle of humanity. The legislation means that within 3 months, contact between the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency workers and Israeli officials will be banned. The UN agency relies on coordination with the Israeli military to get aid into the Palestinian territories. It's estimated that nearly all of Gaza's population rely on services and aid provided by UNRWA. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres says the law would have devastating consequences for Palestinian refugees. Israel has accused the agency of collaborating with Hamas, claiming that 19 of its workers played a role in the October 7th attacks. 9 people were subsequently fired following a UN investigation, and the agency denies any deeper involvement in the attacks. The European Union says it remains committed to supporting UNRWA and urges the Israeli authorities to reconsider its position. William Denslow, Arabiya News, Brussels.
Well, for reaction to this, I'm joined now by the UNRWA spokesperson, Jonathan Fowler. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. I just want to ask you, first of all, what went through your mind when you heard that Israel is imposing this ban?
I mean, I think we had expected the legislation to pass. I mean, obviously, we and other parts of the United Nations system, and indeed the overwhelming majority in the international community had appealed for this not to happen. But what went through our minds was this is like another step in the attempt to dismantle the organization, to hobble us, to prevent us from doing our work at a particularly critical time. So, I mean, a number of people in the office today, we were chatting about this amongst colleagues and reacting, and people were sort of, not surprised, fazed, and I mean, through my mind personally was, well, we have to keep on doing what we do, what we're mandated to do. There is no option on that, and this means that this kind of decision is absolutely unacceptable.
Yeah, for people who don't know, just tell us a little bit more about the role that UNRWA plays.
Okay, so we were created as a specific UN organization as a response to a very specific geographical crisis, which was the Palestine refugee crisis of the late 1940s as a result of the Arab-Israeli war. Now, Our mandate has been repeatedly renewed ever since, every 3 years, and still valid now. And these are decisions of the international community through the voice of the UN General Assembly, the collective voice of the international community, to keep us working. And the reason we're still here after 75 years is because there's not been a diplomatic solution to one of the most protracted refugee crises in the world. So that's why we're still here. But we also exist separate to other things like the right to return, which was actually laid down in another UN resolution a year before we were even created. So if there's any sense that somehow sort of doing away with us, pushing us out of the picture, ends the refugee crisis, that's simply not the case.
And clearly this is going to have huge implications for the people of Gaza, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, in normal times, as it were, I mean, our role, and we were unique in the UN system, is that we are a direct provider of services. So we provide education services, healthcare services, public sanitation, these kind of things for Palestine refugees in five areas. So that's Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem and Gaza. But in times of war times, and when we pivot into sort of humanitarian crises, we become more of a kind of classic humanitarian agency. We have an unparalleled network of staff in the Gaza Strip. We have 13,000 staff in the Gaza Strip, of whom around 5,000 are able to continue operating. We have a logistical platform which is unequaled. We are, and this has been said over and over, we are the backbone of the international humanitarian aid operation in the Gaza Strip. And if you remove the backbone from it, from the situation, from an aid operation, then we find ourselves completely unable as an international community to continue to function in the Gaza Strip. And that doesn't bear thinking about the consequences of that.
Yeah, obviously, there's lots of international concern about this decision by Israel. Some countries calling on Israel to reconsider. Is there any suggestion or any indication that Israel might do that?
It's very hard to say, a day after the vote. I mean, we've certainly observed the voices, the strong support before the vote from key voices in the international community, influential countries, voices from across the UN system, NGOs, before and in the wake of the vote, saying, that this cannot be allowed to happen because, this is much bigger. I mean, the focus is on what this will do to our operations in Gaza and the fact that we are part of the life support system for close to 2 million people who are facing famine, disease, all kinds of horrific challenges, and things are just not getting any better. And this is a man-made crisis, of course. Now, the risk is also that operations unravel in the West Bank, and with potential consequences there. So, there are voices from the international community saying this must not be allowed to happen. But overall, I mean, the issue here is that this goes against all international law. This goes against UN General Assembly resolutions. It goes against International Court of Justice rulings, a whole host of other things which are inscribed into how humanitarian organizations are supposed to be able to operate. And it's in a way, it's a unilateral blow or a sign of a unilateral blow against multilateralism. Now, the multilateral system is not perfect, but it's the best thing we have as a global community. The question then is, if this is allowed to continue, what influence does this have on other situations in other places in the world? And are we looking, is this a foretaste of the unraveling of the multilateral system? And that really is something that does not bode well for the future.
And just let's talk about what Israel has accused you of. Israel accusing Hamas employees of having had a hand in the 7th of October attack. I mean, just briefly, what's your response to that accusation?
I mean, as we've said repeatedly, I want to underline one thing, which is that we have repeatedly condemned the attacks of the 7th of October. They were abhorrent, and there should be no doubt about the fact that UNRWA has been incredibly vocal, as has the rest of the UN system, on what happened. These actions are entirely unacceptable. What I also want to say is that we, as an organization, we know that we operate in a highly politicized context. We are an extremely scrutinized organization, and we're the most scrutinized UN entity. We have what have been rated by independent reviewers as the most robust neutrality framework in the UN system and comparable international NGOs. This is a framework to ensure that people adhere to the values of it is to be a UN civil servant. So private views are not policed, of course, but no actions involving armed groups, no kind of statements online which are unacceptable, incitement to hatred. Whenever we've had cases in the past of things like this, we've always acted, we've investigated, and staff have been sanctioned. In this particular case, so at the end of January, when the allegations from the Israeli authorities first emerged that some of our staff had been involved in the 7th of October, we moved swiftly to suspend the staff in question. We mandated an independent investigation through the top UN investigative body, which is entirely independent of UNRWA, into the allegations. It took time. They needed to work to obtain evidence, which they did not obtain squarely from the Israeli authorities. But the ultimate conclusion was that of 19 staff who were subject to allegations, 9, the investigation concluded that they may, conditional, have been involved in some way, but it wasn't an evidence in sort of criminal law sense. As a result, we all upheld the termination of those staff's contracts. That's been done. We clean house when we need to. We understand the need to do this kind of thing. But sadly, and this is where the overall campaign, the attempts to dismantle UNRWA that I've referred to before, come into play. We see all kinds of outlandish accusations, including from senior Israeli officials, saying UNRWA is completely infiltrated by Hamas. But statistically, all kinds of statistics get thrown around. But if we talk about 9 people, we have 13,000 staff in Gaza. We have 30,000 staff working across the region. Overwhelming majority of our staff are Palestinians themselves. So the real story is here that in a highly politicized, highly sensitive context, people adhere to neutrality, and but yet we get tarnished by these accusations that somehow we're completely the opposite.
Jonathan, sorry to cut you short. We're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. But UNRWA spokesperson Jonathan Fowler, really appreciate you talking to us.
Thank you very much.
We're going to return to the US election now, and millions of Americans have already cast their votes ahead of next week's polling day. Well, recent polls, particularly in the swing states, show a close race between Donald Trump and his Democratic rival Kamala Harris. According to a national poll, Morning Consult's weekly survey, Harris leads Trump by 3 percentage points amongst likely voters, with 50% to Trump's 47%. That is down from a 4-point advantage last week. Well, considering the survey's margin of error of 1%, Harris's lead may range from 49 to 48%, or as wide as 51 to 46%. Well, for more on this, I'm joined now by the chairman of the Republicans Overseas UK, Greg Swenson. Great to have you with us again, Greg. Donald Trump is in Pennsylvania today. Just tell us why that is such an important campaign stop for him.
Yeah, it's really become the critical state amongst the 7 swing states. It's got 19 electoral votes, so it can really move the needle. There's very few paths for either candidate to win the election without winning Pennsylvania. It's possible, but challenging. So it's not surprising that both candidates are spending a lot of time there.
Yeah, reporters and analysts have been telling us that Donald Trump is going to be somewhat in damage repair mode there because, of course, Pennsylvania is home to an estimated 620,000 people of Latino origin.
Sure.
This, of course, following on from that joke made by Tony Hinchcliffe about Puerto Rico. Were you offended by that?
I'm not sure I was offended. I just thought it was stupid, and I thought it was, a mistake. And the fact that it became a distraction because there was so much great news about the Trump rally in New York. Not exactly a hotbed of Republican thought, but New York's a difficult place for Republicans, at least especially in Manhattan. And yet you had 100,000 people show up for this rally. For the most part, it was positive. There was a great energy, and ironically, very diverse, completely diverse compared to the stereotypes of Trump and Republican events. So, you had a lot of Hispanic and African American speakers. You had a lot of Israeli Americans there. You saw a lot of Stars of David and yarmulkes, and so, this was a great moment, and it was unfortunate that it was a distraction. And the specific joke, it wasn't about Puerto Rican people. It was a comment about the excess of landfill of rubbish being dropped in Puerto Rico. And it's the same thing in New York. It's Staten Island, for example, has been like a generational joke about how much more rubbish they have dumped in their areas. So, I think if anything, it should have pointed out or highlighted the fact that there's too much of it. It's unfortunate that it becomes the joke of comedians, but that's the risk of having a comedian at a political event. They often go a little too far, and perhaps he did. But I don't think it will hurt Trump significantly with Hispanics. He's polling 15 points better than compared to the last several elections, both with African Americans and Hispanics. So if Kamala Harris doesn't carry the Hispanic vote and the Black vote at the same levels that Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and even Hillary Clinton carried, I don't see a lot of ways that she can win the election. This was not a good moment, but I don't think it's a major setback.
Greg, the president of the Republican Party in Puerto Rico, his name is Angel Citron, has said that unless Trump personally apologizes for that comment, he won't be voting for him. And that's coming from the head of the Republicans group there in Puerto Rico. Do you think Trump should apologize?
I mean, he already has apologized
directly,
publicly, in the campaign. But why wouldn't he? I mean, it's just an easy phone call, and I don't think that President Trump would have a problem with that. I think that in fact, if anything, it's an opportunity to reach out to the voters in Puerto Rico. I mean, let's face it, Puerto Rico is not going to vote for President Trump, but it's a way to appeal to the people that might have been offended by this in the U.S. So I think it's a great move. I hope he does it.
One other thing I want to ask you about, Steve Bannon got out of prison today. I'm just wondering whether he's likely to play a role in the electoral race.
I think he will. He's obviously been a big supporter of Trump now for 8 or 10 years, and I think he's looked upon by the core, the base of the party favorably. Now, whether he'll be involved, we're a week away from Election Day, and he just got out of prison. But I do think it's a great moment. I think it brings attention to the fact that this lawfare, the weaponization of the justice system, wasn't just about Trump. It was about anybody affiliated with Trump. So I think it's good timing. I'm glad he's out, obviously. And I think if anything, like I said, if it calls attention to the weaponization that both President Trump and many of his colleagues and supporters have gone through, several have gone to jail. And good for him for getting out. He could have avoided this whole jail term if he had cooperated, but he didn't think that cooperating with that kind of a witch hunt was something he should do. So good for him for taking the sort of moral high ground on that.
Just lastly, Greg, a week today until the big day in the United States. Everyone goes to the polls. A lot of early voters already. Between 3% and 5% of Americans undecided. What would you like to see Donald Trump doing these next 6 days in order to capture some of that probably vitally important segment of the electorate?
Of course, and it's a great question. Believe it or not, 3% is what the number I'm seeing of undecideds. That's pretty low. That's a historical low. So I think it means this election will be more decided on turnout, on enthusiasm from the two parties. But of course, 3% can swing the election, given that it's statistically tied right now. You mentioned some polls. If you look at the aggregate of all the polls, Trump is now, as of today, leading by just under 1 point. He's leading by 0.9 of a point nationally. So that's a first for President Trump. And then in the swing states, he's leading collectively by 0.4 or just call it 0.5%. So, he's definitely in the driver's seat right now. And the most recent polls, the aggregators like Real Clear Politics, they use 2 weeks of polling data. But if you look at the last 4 days, 5 days, it's all Trump. So he just has to focus on the two big policies that Americans care about. One is inflation and the economy. Two is the border crisis. On both of those issues, he polls 10 to 15 points higher or ahead of Vice President Harris. So if I were him, my advice would be stick on those two issues. He wins on 9 out of 10 of the issues that, according to Gallup, are the most important to Americans. So he should just focus on that and avoid any sort of, avoid too much personal, constructive criticisms, but any kind of criticisms of her opponent. I think he's better when he talks about the issues and the outcomes.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Greg
Thank
Swenson,
you.
Chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. Thank you.
Good to be here. Thanks.
Let's get a quick check of some other stories we're following for you now. The Russian President Vladimir Putin launches massive drills for the country's nuclear forces. Missiles were test-fired to mimic a large nuclear response to an enemy strike. While Russia's ground, sea and air assets were all part of that exercise. The German ambassador to Iran is recalled after Tehran executes a German-Iranian national. Germany is summoning Iran's top envoy and lodging a formal protest with the Iranian Foreign Ministry. Well, Berlin has also vowed serious consequences, with the top EU diplomat Josep Borrell saying that the European Union is considering its response as well. A $3 billion investment to improve America's port infrastructure. That is part of US President Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act. Well, this comes after a 3-day port strike earlier this month that stopped about half the country's ocean shipping. The Australian Premier has been accused of asking for free upgrades on Qantas flights. The claims against Anthony Albanese were made in a new book which alleged that the Prime Minister used his close relationship with the former CEO to benefit on personal flights. Well, Albanese maintains that he has, quote, acted in a transparent and appropriate way at all times. Let's go check out some business news stories for you now. And BP's third quarter profit fell 30% to $2.3 billion. That's the lowest in nearly 4 years due to weaker refining margins and oil trading. This decline is linked to a slowdown in global economic activity and oil demand, especially in China. Well, the results increase pressure on the CEO, Murray Auchincloss, who aims to improve BP's performance amid investor concerns about its energy transition strategy. Belgium is constructing the world's first green energy island, starting with 23 large concrete boulders for a wind farm-powered energy hub. Well, the project's cost has increased from 2.2 billion euros to more than 7 billion euros, with initial elements set to be deployed at sea next year. Well, currently, just over 10% of Belgium's energy supply comes from renewables. JP Morgan Chase, the largest US bank, is suing customers for check fraud after a viral TikTok glitch allowed them to withdraw funds from deposited checks before they cleared. Well, the bank filed 4 lawsuits in Los Angeles, Houston, and Miami against 2 individuals and 2 businesses accused of illegally keeping $661,000 from forged checks. The banking giant HSBC's pre-tax profit in the third quarter rose 10% year on year. The bank cited revenue growth in 2 of its divisions, while the rise in pre-tax profit to $8.5 billion reflects a strong performance in the wealth management division, as well as higher revenues in global banking and markets. Well, last week, the bank announced a major shake-up under the new chief executive, George El-Hederi, who assumed his role in September. We've got some sports news for you now, and Ruben Amorim has declined to comment on his future at Sporting Lisbon as Manchester United began talks about appointing him as their next permanent manager. Well, the 39-year-old is weighing the chance to success Erik ten Hag with United, open to negotiating his release fee of £8.3 million. Initial discussions have progressed significantly, including conversations about Amorim's coaching staff. Well, United is reportedly seeking a decision from Amorim by the weekend. And the world number 1, Yannick Sinner, has withdrawn from the Paris Masters due to a virus. Sinner's withdrawal means Carlos Alcaraz is now the highest-ranked player in the draw. He will face Nicolas Jarry in the second round. Last week, the 24-time Grand Slam champion Novak Djokovic also withdrew from the final ATP 1000 event of the year. And the Tour de France will finish at the Champs-Élysées in Paris once again next year. The race will feature an all-French route for the first time in 5 years, and its first finish at the Mont Ventoux since 2013. Well, the organisers say the race will return to the capital for the 50th anniversary of the very first arrival on the Champs-Élysées. And we got some breaking news from the Middle East. The Naim Qassem has taken over as the head of Hezbollah. Qassem was Hezbollah's deputy secretary under the Hassan Nasrallah. Well, following the news of this appointment, the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant says this would be, quote, temporary and not for long. Well, the Iran-backed group has been reeling from back-to-back losses of their leadership following relentless Israeli attacks since September. Well, Hashem Safieddine was slated to take over from Nasrallah before he too was assassinated in an Israeli operation earlier on this month. And we've got some news just coming into us here at Al Arabiya. The UN has written a letter to the Israeli Prime Minister with regard to that UNRWA ban we were just talking about a little earlier on. They're asking for them to reconsider that. News just into us. The UN has written to Israel asking for them to reconsider that ban on UNRWA, which provides vital aid across the Palestinian territories. And the US is urging Sudanese paramilitaries to halt their deadly assault immediately in the state of Al Jazeera. Sudan, of course, in a state of war for more than a year now. So the United States urging that war, that fighting comes to an end. Well, the United States also making clear its concerns and its opposition to Israel's bill. That news I was just talking about there, the UNRWA ban. Israel tabling, the United States tabling its opposition to that. We're just getting that from the State Department. This news just coming into us as we speak to you now. And the Israeli Chief of General Staff says, if Iran makes the mistake of launching another missile barrage at Israel, we will follow up once again. And we know how to reach Iran with capabilities we did not even use this time around. That's a reference to suggestions that Iran could be planning a counterattack to the attack that was carried out during the weekend by Israel on Iran. Let's get a quick reminder of our top stories here on Al Arabiya News. With just a week to go until Election Day, the former US President Donald Trump heads to key battleground state of Pennsylvania as Kamala Harris holds a rally in Washington, D.C. The Israeli parliament votes to ban the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency from operating in Israel and the occupied East Jerusalem, alleging its collusion with Hamas, and that's raising concerns about the delivery of aid to war-torn Gaza. And Hezbollah has named Naim Qassem as the group's new head. This after the killing of Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut last month. That is all we have time for. Coming up next is Hadley Gamble, and at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, do join us for Global News Today. That's a roundup of top international news with exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers. That's it from us. Stay tuned.